How can you trust what you read, what you watch? Disinformation runs rampant, and identifying reliable news sources is difficult and time-consuming. Well, today we're going to be talking to some people who are working on a way to solve that problem. So stay tuned. Hey everybody, this is Chris Brandt here with Sandesh Patel. Welcome to another FUTRtech video podcast. We love startups, and it's always fun to talk to them in the early stages. And today we're talking with TheNewsroom, a startup out of Portugal that utilizes AI, industry expertise, and behavioral psychology to reliably evaluate news stories for trustworthiness. Now, this is something that the world desperately needs. So we're going to talk to the Newsroom founders, Pedro Henriques and Jenny Romano, about what they are building and why it is so important. Welcome, Jenny and Pedro.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much, Chris.
I'm so excited to talk to you guys. And it's, the timing is interesting with the recent invasion of the Ukraine by Russia and the incredible uptick in disinformation that's going on right now. But before we get into all this, could you just tell me a little bit about yourselves, about the past experiences that you had that drove you to start up the Newsroom?
Well, I'm Jenny. I am originally Italian, but as you said, the Newsroom is based out of Portugal, out of Lisbon. I studied economics and management and then went on to start my career in tech. And before launching the Newsroom, I was working at Google as an account manager. So I was working with some of the large advertisers across Southern Europe and advising them on their marketing strategy.
So from my side, I was also in Dublin at the time when Jenny was there. I was at LinkedIn in a data science team. So very involved in understanding how people share content online, how they engage with content on a social media platform. And kind of part of that also brought us together and into this world of trying to fight misinformation online.
So I got to imagine when, both being at Google and LinkedIn, you saw a lot of disinformation. Is that sort of what sparked the idea for the Newsroom?
I think the idea for the Newsroom was came before starting even our jobs. The area of misinformation is something that both of us were very much interested in for a long time. And I think 2015, 2016 was kind of the point in which our interest grew. And then COVID actually was the catalyzer that led us to actually take the step towards starting the Newsroom. But I think both Pedro and I are news geeks at heart, and we love debating with people. And so the issue of misinformation was very, very dear to us before even starting our careers, I would say.
Yeah, and I think as Jenny said, we kind of over time saw it bubbling up in different places, then also with COVID, but we started realizing, first in politics, but then also saw this coming up a lot in issues like climate, issues like COVID, and that was paired to us starting also a career in technology, also getting that exposure in different ways, more from a business side for Jenny, more from a data side for myself. And all of that combined really took us to then decide, okay, actually, let's not just talk about this and have this as an interest and something that worries us, but actually let's try to do something to counter it.
Well, I love the idea of just seeing a problem and going and trying to fix it. And it's a big problem and it's a hard problem. And I think, we always say that solving the hard problems is what's really going to differentiate you. So, I think you've picked a good one.
Thank you.
If hard is the metrics, definitely.
Yes. So tell me, what is the Newsroom?
So the Newsroom, in essence, and you said it well at the start, our mission is twofold. It's one, to fight misinformation online, and two, to promote plurality, so diversity of thoughts. We started very much with a mission, with a problem from the beginning. And so actually when we started the Newsroom, it wasn't still the Newsroom, it was this mission statement. And what we decided to do was actually go out and just talk to people, to different experts, And we mainly focus on 3 areas: journalism and ethical journalism, behavioral psychology, and just technology, as well as news, as newsreaders, etc. And from there, we really dug deep into how each of these areas play into this wider problem of misinformation, and ended up defining how we wanted to approach it, how we wanted to apply technology to try to solve this issue.
So tell me, like, how did you apply technology to this? Like, what is the secret sauce that makes this all work?
To answer this, we need to go back to the research that Pedro was talking about. So in the very initial stages, we started engaging journalists with this very simple question, and that was, okay, so regardless of technology, if as a reader, a person, I want to understand if what I have in front of me is actually trustworthy, what do I have to look at? Because each of us has their own ways, but honestly, before these conversations, I never really had a systematic approach. Okay, step 1, step 2, step 3. And so we came up with what I, as an Italian, call the ingredient list of the things to look at when you evaluate an article. And they are 5 pillars, and we can talk about them if you want. But basically then on those 5 pillars, we decided to apply technology to try and do it at scale. And actually, I'll tell you what the 5 pillars are. Because
yeah, I'd love to hear
it. So the first one is the source. So basically we look at if the source is generally considered as trustworthy. How do you define that? Is basically through, first of all, there are a bunch of agencies and NGOs out there that do this. So they assess the trustworthiness of a source. And they look at, for example, stuff like failed fact checks. So, okay, they posted this a month ago. Was this actually factual? And they look at the potential political bias that the source has. Secondly, we look at the transparency around the author. So do we know who wrote this, and is there transparent information about their bio, about what they wrote in the past, what type of expertise they have? Thirdly, we look at references. So all the little hyperlinks you see scattered around an article, what do those hyperlinks redirect to? Are they highly reputable sources? Are they an Instagram post? What are they? And how well referenced the article is. And lastly, there are 2 elements that are honestly a bit more using actual AI than the first 3. And the first one is looking at key claims. So basically the technology that we have built extracts the key claims that the article is making and then cross-references them online. So we are saying that, I don't know, the sky is violet today. Who else is saying that? Is it only Jenny's personal blog, or is it also other very reputable sources? And if they're talking about that, is there agreement or is there disagreement on the key claim that we're looking at? And we look at that as a very high indicator of the trustworthiness of the actual claims being made. And last but not least, we look at the language. And so what type of language is being used in the article? And so is there a probability of having clickbait or bias depending on the language in the title or in the body of text of the article? All of this, we apply AI to it. So we try and do it at scale instead of you having to do it for each of the aspects by yourself.
You know, some of these things are really hard to figure out, I would have to imagine. You know, like you were just mentioning, you know, the language, right? Mm-hmm. And you said, you know, you used the term clickbait. And, you know, one of the things that I see a ton of is sources that are not necessarily traditional disinformation sources still use clickbait to, you know, draw you in. I mean, I you know, doing YouTube, I know that, you know, the things that really are super important are the titles and the thumbnails, you know, unfortunately. But and there's a tremendous temptation to put together clickbaity titles, right? Mm-hmm. But I don't think that really serves anybody. But I gotta imagine it's hard to filter all of that noise out. I mean, like, what special magic are you using to figure all that out?
The first starting point is just defining these things, right? Because even clickbait, it can mean a lot of different things for different people.
Right.
And
right.
Of course, there is a fine line between making something that is engaging and that people, want to engage with and click on and get informed about, and something that is just, really pushing you to click on something that maybe is not so useful. And so the first step is defining it and making it very clear also to the user, in our case, the person who consumes it, what the definition is. For us, clickbait is one of two things: either something that is really sensational beyond what the actual news that's being reported on is, or something that is withholding important information to make you click, and you see this a lot. These 10 things have been proven to make you healthier, and they don't tell you what it is, and you just have that curiosity to click on it. So that's how we define it, and that's one of the important the important elements is also sharing that definition. And actually, to add to what Jenny was explaining, that transparency element is one of the things that we are betting a lot on. So we are using AI not just to scale those elements, but actually we're using something that is called explainable AI to give users an explanation of how we assess something. So we give you a score based on these 5 elements, and we tell you, okay, this is why we believe this is trustworthy or not trustworthy.
I think that's really important, because one of the problems with AI is, something goes in the front end and it comes out the back end. We don't necessarily know how we got from point A to point B, point Z even. And
you end up not trusting it.
Right. You can't trust it because, one, you don't trust technology in general, to make good decisions always. But then, you don't know what the implicit biases of the people who built it are, right? So, like, what kinds of things do you report on out of the AI?
So we give you 2 things. We give or 3 things actually. We give you the overall score. So do we believe this is trustworthy or not? A very short summary of why we believe that. And it might be, and that's where the subtlety comes in as well, right? Because it might be that something is not trustworthy because it is making a claim that actually is being disputed by high quality sources. And so we tell you that this is why we believe it's not true. And these are the sources that support what we're saying. Or it might be actually that it's based on facts, right? The claims are right, but they are being shared in a very biased way. They're being selected in a very biased way, potentially for, a purpose, a political purpose. And so all of that you have in that summary, you understand, is it something that is wrong? Is it something that is just being positioned in a biased way? And then you can really deep dive into each of these 5 elements that Jenny said. For each of those, how is this assessed? What's the description behind it? So a little bit as a user, you can also, choose how deep into, the weeds you want to go on the assessments, but the transparency is there for you to use.
I think that's awesome because, one of the things I think so many people don't realize is what you just said, is that sometimes it's factual information. It's just presented in a context that makes it very biased, or in a context that's designed to evoke an emotional response, right? Exactly. And I got to imagine that's where you mentioned that you worked with behavioral psychologists.
So with behavioral psychologists, what we really were trying to understand was, how can we build trust with people? Or actually, what makes people put their trust into something or not, right? So if you read a piece of news, what makes you trust it and what makes you not trust it? So that was one of the main questions. And kind of 2 big learnings that came from those discussions. One was, once again, the importance of transparency, just telling people in a very authoritative way, this is right, this is wrong, etc., just doesn't work. And if you have your mind set up in something, you're not going to change it because of that. That's the first thing. The second thing was the importance of exposure to different points of view. And this was quite, a few different and interesting insights came from that element, because research on this is a little bit contradictory. Because what you see and what research said right at the start was, actually, if you put two people together that have very diverging views, and you tell them, okay, start a conversation, let's say about a topic, whatever topic it is that is confrontational, people generally will actually come out of that conversation more polarized, because you're talking with someone you completely disagree with, the conversation gets very polarized, and you don't get to an agreement. However, there are certain elements in how you can frame that conversation that will make it more constructive and will actually bring people to open up their or be more open to changing their mind. And on that, there were two very interesting pieces of research, in my opinion, that we saw. One is when you have that conversation with someone that you somehow relate to. So let's say, we're talking about gun control, something that is quite polarized by nature. If I am speaking to someone that I disagree with, but whom I know is either from the same political stance as myself, or from the same background, something with whom I identify with, then I'm much more likely to be open to hearing that different point of view, to challenging the way I think, etc. And this, I use that example of a topic, but it works for any topic, really. So that's one thing that's really interesting. The second thing that I found really interesting was how you frame the conversation when you start it. And so there were these researchers that what they did was they first did that case that I talked about, put two people together, have a discussion, and that's it. And then what they did was they asked people to fill out a form before engaging in that conversation. And throughout the form, they asked something that was similar to, in a democracy, do you believe that it's important to be open to other points of view and to challenging your views? And it wasn't exactly this wording, but it was something that, most people would say yes to. This sounds reasonable, that makes sense. And then they let the people go into that discussion. And what they found was that simply by framing that at the start, people were then much more open to having a constructive conversation, and reported afterwards that the conversation was constructive, less polarized, etc. And so those two elements we found were very interesting, and also were great insights for our work at the Newsroom.
Yeah, I mean, if you can, I know you've mentioned, before and several times that the plurality is a big piece of all of this, right?
Yeah.
And if you can accomplish that without further polarizing, it's even better, right?
So we've talked a little bit about how you guys are using AI to understand content online. Have you done any research or looked into like how people's mental health at the time of getting content is impacting their maybe openness or their closeness? It seems to me like, especially during the COVID times, I think people that weren't feeling healthy, that people didn't feel like themselves, weren't feeling those endorphins going and the love that we're all used to with humans and everything else. I wonder if there's any way to kind of use that kind of data to understand, does that leave them more susceptible to disinformation?
We haven't looked at specific research on it, to be honest. But, I guess in general, when there are big events like these, which also affect your mental health, they are very difficult to navigate. And I think they are for two reasons. One is just that the sheer volume of information increases, right? And something like COVID and something like what we're living right now with Russia and Ukraine, it's very difficult to navigate it. And then if you are in a state of mind where you're already, feeling that life in general is difficult to navigate for whatever reason, I do imagine that compounds. And we do see when there are those big events that misinformation tends to spread more, it's more difficult to navigate, etc. If there is a correlation between the two, to be honest, we haven't looked at specific research on it.
Yeah, I think it'd be really tough to measure, right? I mean, how do you how do you even measure something like that? You know, it's just that we've seen this where, you know, a lot of people in the States, you know, are losing their minds literally, you know, and sometimes they see something online and they get some comfort on some of the negativity, right? And they kind of thrive off of it. And then all they're doing is they're at home and they're clicking and they're clicking and they're clicking, and it's just in their brain. And at some point they start to believe this madness. And by the way, these are some people that I consider normal people, you know, in most cases, you know, so that part to me is a bit scary.
So we haven't looked at specific research about the correlation between mental health and how that affects your information consumption. However, there are two interesting areas that I think were related to this during COVID specifically. One of them is that during COVID, I think more and more people realize that misinformation is a problem. And you see that by the number of people that made a subscription to a paid newspaper or magazine or whatever during COVID. So a lot of newspapers actually had their revenue going up and their number of subscriptions going up during COVID. And we were recently at a conference in which they were talking about this, and the people that were there were justifying this as during COVID people witnessed the importance of accurate information. So even though we haven't really looked at it, I think there must be something there. When you are basically completely overwhelmed by a pandemic that's taking over the world, if your first reaction is, okay, let me go and seek accurate information, for me, that's a signal. Of course, it's not a scientific study, but it is something that I would take into account. And
that's a great point.
It is. It's like when I listened to it at the conference, I was like, yes, obviously, but no, not obviously, because I had not thought about it myself. And there is a second thing, which is an experiment that Facebook ran. I don't remember exactly when, but I think it was just a few months ago. And basically, they tested the happiness level of their users when there were more news on their feed and when there were less news on their feed. And it turns out less news on their feed actually made them happier. So you can draw a bunch of conclusions here, and none of them would be very scientifically sound, because you need to dig deeper into it. What type of news was it? Was it reliable news, etc., etc.? But again, there is something there talking about the correlation, in this case, reverse in terms of causation, between your news consumption and your mental health.
Unfortunately, you know, happiness doesn't generate a lot of clicks either, though. But I was going to say, one of the things that, you know, I have a hard time having empathy for some people, you know, sometimes in the context of all this, who are spouting a lot of disinformation and things like that. But, you know, I had sort of an epiphany that, you know, brought me to a better place in the sense that I'm starting to recognize that a lot of these people are having what I would consider an anxiety response, you know, to everything that's going on. And when you're living in a state of heightened anxiety, you know, your cognitive abilities decline. And your ability to engage critical thinking and, you know, like have some critical media literacy, you know, things going on, I think it gets really diminished when all this goes on. And then you feed on that and you get, you know, just you're constantly in this echo chamber that just feeds on your anxiety, because that generates a lot of clicks, right? You know, the endless doom scrolling that everybody, including myself, do, you know, so I think there's definitely something there, and that's why I think it's really interesting that you're working with, you know, behavioral psychologists and things like that, because I think that is going to be a big piece of what you do. Yeah,
it is, and you actually see more and more people that we talk to nowadays that say, I don't read the news because they give me anxiety. It like I feel bad when I read it, and that's a very strong signal. The news should be a tool. It should not be it should be a tool for you to be an active citizen, to live your life, to decide who to vote, what to do. It shouldn't be inducing anxiety or anything like that. Now, I mean, of course, you're going to have breakthrough events. COVID is one of them. I think it's hard to say there is a pandemic and not induce anxiety. But then once that news is out, then the way you communicate about it on an ongoing basis actually determines the level of emotional response that people get towards it.
I mean, one of the goals of news is to give you safety in a way, right? Mm-hmm. If you have information, you feel more prepared to deal with whatever is happening around you. And so it is a little counterintuitive that it can generate and trigger those feelings as well, but it is happening. So we need to realize why it is. And
there's too much information. I think you get overflooded with so much. And if you have notifications on from social media, from news apps, from newspapers, you have an RSS feed and whatever, like you're completely overwhelmed by the amount of information. So I think there is something that needs to be improved, I would say.
I told my wife yesterday, I think I'm going to stop watching CNN for a while. You know what I mean? And I used to watch it every day. It was just part of just watch, 20, 30 minutes, get caught up. Now I just know what I'm going to have. It's going to be every day. It's going to be this bad news. So it does deter me. But maybe we can steer this conversation, especially because we have our European friends here, about, what's happening right now and what's happening with disinformation and misinformation right now.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are in the right market at the right time for sure. I mean, can you, I know, you guys have a lot of people calling you and asking you what's what. Can you talk about how what the current events here are impacting what you guys are doing?
It's a huge event where a lot of what we were talking about before is happening at times 10, right? It's an overflood of information. No one really knows what to trust, what not to trust. And so it's difficult for everyone, for the journalists, for the fact checkers, and especially for the general public who is reading it. I think what we've been seeing a lot of people tell us as well of how they've been reacting to it, which I think is an interesting way of looking at it, is I'm actually not constantly looking at every single notification that comes up and every single new update because I just get overwhelmed. What I'm doing is giving some time and maybe 2 days after going back and seeing, okay, what really happened in these past 2 days? What with some distance from it, with some time from it, in which it's possible to actually analyze what the real events happened. What are the analysts telling us? Of course, it's an ever-changing situation, and so it's you do want to keep up to date with everything that's happening and know how to react, but at the same time you need that little bit of distance. And so, to be honest, we don't have any quick answers to it and easy answers to it. It is honestly very difficult to navigate. It is very normal that you will feel overwhelmed. We do as well, absolutely. And we need to take it day by day and see, when we start understanding where the truth is coming from, because right now it's actually not very clear, I'd say.
Yeah, I don't think there can be a definitive answer to this now. And we as the newsroom certainly don't have it. So if somebody out there has it, please share. The situation is so complex from a geopolitical standpoint, from a historical standpoint, from all sorts of standpoints. If I had to tell you, go and trust X instead of trusting Y, I honestly would not be able to do that. I think now it's... Personally, what I am doing right now is trying to follow people that are on the ground, looking at journalists that are there, that are sharing information from it, And what I'm trying to do is diversify as much as possible the type of sources that I interact with. I'm Italian. I of course consume Italian news. I try to consume other Western media. I try and consume Eastern media as well, because if you're not there and you don't witness it with your eyes, and something that has unfolded so quickly, how do you put an order in that? Personally, I'm not capable of doing that, and so that's what I'm trying to do. I cannot tell you if that is the best course of action, but it is what is giving me more or less a rounded overview of what's happening.
Well, at the very least, you're getting a whole lot of training data for your AI.
Yes,
for sure.
Tell me a little bit about, like, you guys are now in an early beta of your platform, right? Yeah. It's invite only, so people hopefully will be able to see what you're doing soon. Can you just tell me about, like, what are the next steps for the Newsroom and where you guys are going from here?
Well, right now what we have out, and we're testing it with a small group of people, is a browser extension. And basically through the browser extension, if you are on a news feed, can be social media, can be a newspaper, whatever news feed you have in front of you, you're going to get the assessments that we were talking about. So you get our logo, and then if you hover over it, you get in full transparency how the algorithm worked, what it took into account to reach a conclusion. What we're doing with this is basically gathering feedback, as much feedback as possible, to keep iterating on the technology. This is the first thing we have out. And so, of course, user feedback is probably the most important thing we can get right now. We are currently working on a mobile application that will actually work in a bit of a different direction, and more on building plurality in the way we consume the news. And so basically through the app, you will get a super quick snapshot of the news around topics that you may care about. Climate change, let's say. I'm trying to shy away a little bit from the elephant in the room now. So let's say you're interested in climate change, you're going to get really a super quick snapshot, 1 minute of reading around whatever it is that is happening. And then we frame that news in two types of context. One of them is historical. So basically, what are the key events that led to the news you're reading today? Let's say there was a flood. What happened before? Why was there a flood? On the one hand. On the other hand, we look at current context. So how are different publishers talking about the same issue? What are the differences and what is common ground? So you get a critical overview of where the news is going. So you understand the communication and the arguments that are being used. But most importantly, you find the common ground. You find the one thing to start having a conversation from with somebody that maybe thinks differently from you. And the objective with that is, first of all, so building common ground as much as possible, but also exposing you to different points of view. So, okay, I'm thinking A, there are people that think Z. Before going into all the outrage and the polarization, what do they actually think? So let me see what are the arguments before any emotional, exaggerated reaction kicks in. And so this is what we're working on right now. The app will follow a similar release strategy. So it will be initially with a very small group of users with the same objective. So trying to get as much feedback as possible to iterate before sharing it with the wider public. The app, the initial version will be launched in April. So we are a month and a bit away from it. So we're not stressed at all. And yeah, so this is going to be the very big next step for us. And then iterate.
And then I understand you guys are, you are an early stage company, and you're out, you're looking to raise some money at this point too, aren't you?
We are. So right now the newsroom is completely self-funded. So it is myself and Pedro running on our savings. And that's the whole company. There's nobody else, even though we have 2 interns joining very soon. And the objective, yes, is definitely to raise capital to finance the newsroom. At the end of the day, what we want to do is to build a product that people would love and would use, and most importantly, that would drive impact. And in order to do that, we need to hire very smart and committed people. And so that's where the capital would flow.
It's certainly an important task that you're taking on. And I got to imagine there's, anybody who's looking to invest in something that's, going to promote social welfare, that's a good place to, spend some money.
Thank you.
How do people get in touch with you if they wanted to, join your beta group, or if they wanted to, invest, or if they want to just find out more information about you guys?
So there is a website, and it is TheNewsroom.ai. Alternatively, you can reach out to us directly via LinkedIn or via email. We have a general email that is info@thenewsroom.ai. We do check it more than once a day, so it is not those info that never get checked. I promise we check it. And I would say those are the best ways,
best vehicles.
Well, I think what you're doing is really awesome. I can't wait to see when it all goes live, and it's really being consumed by a lot of people. Hopefully, it turns the situation around a bit, because it's terrifying what's happening out there right now. But I just want to say thank you guys so much for coming on and sharing your story, and good luck to everything with everything you're doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Chris and Sandesh.
so much. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Love to hear from you in the comments. And if you like what you saw, give us a like. And please think about subscribing. The subscribing helps the channel a ton. And I will see you in the next video.